All right. Hello, everybody. It is Dr. Rich Scheibner back here with you for Get Writ Live, our live stream we do every Wednesday here during the term, except for reading week, of course, things like that. But welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be back. We had a wonderful chat last week on writing as and anti-racism with Ms. Swift, and talked about so many different resources, upcoming events here during Black History Month. If you've not checked that stream out, please do. It's wonderful. It's a good way to think about what's all coming up. Workshops and editathons and things of that sort. You may want to look at this month, and especially during reading week. But hope you're all doing well in this, let's just say, not so fair weather, raining, things like that. I'm excited to talk about today's topic. So we're back once again. Today's topic is writing as and collaboration, and today's special guest is Dr. Stevie Bell, Associate Professor of Writing at York and head of McLaughlin College here at the university. So we will speak with Stevie just later on in the program, in the show, about noon. But before we begin our main topic, I want to mention a couple of things that I always mention, as is custom now here on the stream. I'd like to first talk about the big thanks to Dr. John Suffern, the Writing Center Director, for supporting us during the stream, another term of it, and also to the Writing Center, or the Writing Department and Writing Center staff for supporting us. Big thanks to everyone for making this possible. While it is just me talking here sometimes on the stream, there are so many people that I would call collaborators and supporters for making this happen. So big shout out to them. I feel like I need to, and I should, every stream giving a shout out, because they're doing so much behind the scenes that we just don't see here up on the screen. You can find our YouTube page also linked in the show notes. This is where we have a link to it right here. And basically this is where we have all the things that are happening right now. For example, you can see I've got to put this actually in a different browser. Give me a second. That's not the one we're looking at. This is what we're looking at. So this is live right now, as you can see, and I won't play it just because we'll have a kind of echo effect, I think, at some point. But yeah, we stream every Wednesdays, always welcoming guests. If you have anyone you think would be great for the program, please let us know. You can reach out to us on YouTube, or you can send me an email, which is linked in our show description as well. All right, so we've got that. And, we also have all kinds of different workshops. Now, on our Writing Center page, we have a list of what's coming up. For example, today, writing as and collaboration and collaborating. After reading week, March 1st, we're back to talk about writing as and traveling. I have things to say about that because I'm going to Norway actually for a research trip, and doing some presenting out there as well. We'll talk about revision, talk about virtual reality. So we're going to kind of get a little more experimental. We'll bring it back to thinking about conversations and composing lit reviews. So how can we kind of intervene in lit reviews in really productive ways? What kind of questions come up and keywords come up when we do that? Questions of anti-racism, citation practices, and things like that. Always a good space to be thinking about those when you're doing a lit review. Presenting, so what kind of tools are out there? And then composing yourself is what we have as well for the next few weeks. So really excited about these. We have guests already lined up for a number of these, so stay tuned for those. And can't say this enough, if you have anyone you'd recommend, if you're a student, if you're a fellow faculty, and things like that, I'm happy to take the suggestions. I think it's really, really interesting. All right, so do a little deep dive into today's topic for just a bit. I did forget to mention one thing. Sorry, I'm checking my notes here. We have what's coming up with the streams, but also workshops. I mentioned last week, Dr. Christopher Morris's anti-racist writing workshop. All of these happen twice a term. So I'm teaching research methods on March 6th, 16th. We have one that's happening tomorrow, it looks like, as well, on revising sentences. So on the line editing level, as well as on the level of larger kind of issues with like analysis of an argument, organization and shape of it, and methods you could sort of deploy in order to see those sort of arguments through. Come check them out. They're all totally free. They're on Zoom. And then the most important thing that we offer, I would argue, is our one-on-one appointments. So always open. We have numerous faculty that are here to support you and can address a range of different tasks and things like that you may be working on for your projects, especially if you're on a midterm right now and you're trying to finish that up. This might be a good time to book an appointment. It's not too late. You've got Thursday and Friday as well. Drop-in sessions, and we also have accessibility specialists and other sort of workshops and resources have out there. So big thanks to the staff and faculty for driving that. I'm happy to be a part of this. I would say family, of resources so that we can support you as fellow writers. All right, that's my little spiel. Today's topic: writing as and collaboration. More often than we might realize, and this is what I sort of wanted to say in the description, writing, it's a highly collaborative activity. We're going to talk mostly about visible and kind of invisible collaborators that have made writing possible. And what I mean by that is we might have a visible collaborator, such as somebody that is in a byline with us, right, who co-authored an article, for example. If you look at my list of what I've composed, more often than not, I'm working in collaboration with somebody. The field of writing studies very much values collaboration and has defended that approach in many ways through, official documentations and so forth, because, we can kind of lean on each other for different strategies and approaches in order to produce and circulate knowledge. So we could do sort of single authored things, but I honestly just find a lot of value in working together with people. And there are questions we can kind of get into about things like, well, how do you sort of track who does what, and how do you get into first authorship? Those are probably would warrant a more deeper dive into those sort of things, and they could be kind of, messy. It's hard to determine sometimes who does what. But on the surface, many people get together and writers get together and write together for reasons of accountability or to accentuate each other's strengths, address each other's weaknesses, things of that sort. So for example, I just want to quickly walk through, like Dr. Beth Caravella, we've collaborated numerous times already on projects. We take different approaches when we write, but in many ways they intersect well, and we kind of build on it. We, sort of carry each other in different ways, support each other. So recently we did a piece that came out early this year on surveying the effects of remote collaboration and communication. So it's very, in line with what this topic is today. And then we also brought in Nandita Narayanamurthy, who was a PhD student in humanities and has since moved on to a great position. Recently I've collaborated with student undergraduates as well. So Jessica De Silva and Anika Rahman for Composition Forum. A fellow professor and a good friend of mine, Sarah Riddick, we've collaborated as well on a piece for music composition, and the list goes on. I have another single authored piece coming out. I also have a book in progress that I hope comes out sometime this year. That's single authored, but most of the stuff I've done has been with another writer, and it can take many different forms. Let me tell you specifically about something I did with two undergraduate students at York as part of another program that we have at the university. And if you're a student, you may want to be kind of bookmarking this, because I think it's a really cool opportunity, especially because you get paid to do research. And that whole thing is coming out now, and I'll link to it in the show notes. Okay, so this is a piece we did. It's you can find the link, if a quick search, I'll put it in the notes as well. But we did this piece called The Discourse-Based Interview on Twitch, Methods for Studying the Tacit Knowledge of Game Developers. And so what this stemmed from was a project called DARE, which is, now it's through York. That's one thing. And well, one more quickly. But what happens is, as part of this project, faculty will propose a project that they're pursuing or maybe exploring and so forth. And they outline sort of what the project is and what people are looking for, what they're looking for. So as you can see here, like the very first one, by Ali Asagri, is on sustainable hockey in Canada. So we have like the description of the project. We have what the responsibilities would be with the students, and then the qualifications that are required. And what this is doing really with this whole ask generally for DARE and any other posting we sort of see here, fabulous ones that were listed, and I hope a lot of people applied, is they're inviting students to apply to be collaborators, right, in different ways. Maybe not so much on the manuscript generation and writing, but all the stuff that makes the writing later possible. And so for my project, what I did, and this is also linked in the article itself, is I put out the call of what I was looking for. I wanted to bring them in to help me with qualitative research, doing the second part of a study of digital content creators and the kind of emotions that are entangled with making productions and so forth. And so I wanted them to be available for interviews, kind of doing audience commentaries and things like that. And so you can kind of see like, and this isn't to be, I think when we say the word low level, it may be framed as like, oh, that's just, like grunt work or something like that. Or, it has like a kind of connotation to it, but I just meant like maybe even low stress, like not as involved. But the way I framed it was low level, like helping with database collection of writers and creators that we can interview, looking at audience commentaries on public spaces like Twitch and YouTube, helping schedule interviews, editing transcripts, things like that, doing literature searches more than reviews. And all those sort of things. And then actually later on moving into a more involved collaborative effort, which is looking at literature reviews and writing them up, analyzing audience commentary, and then drafting a presentation or, as we saw here, an article at the end of the term. And so, roughly a summer of collaborating with the faculty, you can do a lot of different things. And hello to Dia. So Dia mentioning, missed the writing faculty DARE projects this year. I'll be in my final year next year. Yeah, and I would say too, keep in mind that there may be opportunities. You'd have to talk to the LAPS sort of faculty and research team about how it works if you're graduating, because if I'm not mistaken, there were students who did graduate but ended up still having the opportunity to work on DARE before they finished. In fact, one student that I worked with was doing something similar, and I think it worked out pretty well. But there's some kind of corner cases, right? That may work. And frankly, to that point too, like I will mention, like I totally missed the deadline this year to apply for DARE research. I just got a little bit. I'll just admit, I think it kind of just in the zone. We're working on the book and things of that sort, so didn't get to apply. But I really love doing it as a faculty, and I hope I can get back to it again. My colleague, Dr. Brandy Easter, also did it last year, and had, from what I understand, a wonderful experience with the students. And it's nice to actually work with faculty across different disciplines or students across disciplines. I learned a lot when bringing in like a student from communication, for example. Like we have different methods and ways of thinking that I thought were pretty productive. So that kind of occurred to me as we were talking through this, that research does well when it's funded, especially for everybody, and especially working with students. I think you can get some really nice collaborations, and LAPS does a good job of supporting students who want to do this kind of collaborative work. Okay, so that's the sort of background for how we got there. Now, in terms of task separation and stuff and how we worked together, for a number of writers, it's a matter of getting a document. We'll talk about that later in the show about Google Docs and other programs that seem to be working really well for writers to collaborate in real time or asynchronously in different ways. And it may just be purely text-based. So for a number of my projects with Dr. Beth Carabella and others, it's mostly just been in a Google Doc that we've been working on. For this piece, we took a slightly different approach. The students were helping with some of the background information on those sort of low-level tasks that I mentioned. I did most of the writing for this part. So you see all the prose that we see here, mostly by me. Just kind of being more familiar, I'd say, with the conventions of academic argumentation and sort of manuscript writing for this context. But what they contributed, and I thought was super valuable, is the videos that we see in this. Because they both had experience in composing short social media videos on Canva and for other programs. What they decided to do was compose these quick 1-minute videos that, distilled what they were seeing in this argument. So I would write the script, the manuscript, I would pass it on to them section by section, and then they would render it in the form of a video so that it was nice and digestible for readers. And so you can't hear the sound in this, but if you check out the article, you can see sort of how it moves. And again, 1 minute, we're getting the audio and we're getting the visuals. They were responsible for creating these kind of tables and so forth. And I love doing this because when I would see their draft, I would think about, okay, how can I take some of this interesting language in different ways and put it into, the text itself, references and so forth. There's only so much you can do textually with referencing a highly visual form like video games and Twitch streamers, as we sort of did for this project. And so what they did is, as they were composing this, is they put it, like I said, Canva, but they were also, using Creative Commons footage, things of that sort, in order to tell this story, as well as footage we captured from interviews. And just this kind of back and forth worked really well when we got to the latter stage of the collaboration. But for a number of weeks, it started off much differently. We weren't writing together for that long, I would say. The thing starts in May, June, and it ends right before school starts. So how do we manage those kind of projects? That was the challenge, right? Like it's a challenge for anybody working on collaborative stuff. So what I'll mention is we started with research questions and a project timeline. You're going to hear this if you ever see anything on how to manage collaborative projects. I find I work really well when I know what I got to be doing month to month. And so we came up with the task lists, kind of here, the general broad strokes of things we wanted to do between now and the end. And we worked backwards. So the students wanted to compose a poster for the DARE experience. I wanted to do a proposal for a manuscript that we could submit to Composition Forum. And so we were going to kind of work on those two things by the end, but also acknowledge we might have breaks, things of that sort. So everybody's on the same page about what we're trying to do over the next few weeks and months. We had research questions. And then what I really valued, and I thought was really great for accountability for everybody, is we started with who, the task you're doing that's related to the above goals, and then deadlines for it. Any notes, whether it was marked as complete, right? Lots of stuff. So you can see, like, we're doing an interview, we're uploading stream data that we've captured. We're analyzing the chat transcripts and coming together. Then we have an intermission, right? Things of that sort. Who's doing what? Check for feedback on the proposal from the editors we've submitted it to. Come to the meetings with drafts of the videos or transcripts and plans, things like that. And then wrapping everything up. Now, unfortunately, this was still at the height of the pandemic, or one of the waves, I should say. I don't want to suggest we're totally out of the clear yet or anything like that, but it was all remote. Like, I didn't meet these students the entire time because there wasn't really an opportunity to do it. But breaking it down and dissecting it by month and task was really instrumental for making sure everybody's doing their part and they know what they should be doing. Because if we're just sitting in a dock and working together, it can happen, writing can come out of it. But I think we had to kind of be a bit more scientific about it to make sure things were getting complete. And then let's look at this real quick, just some things that came out of that. So all of our project files, for example, were stored on a Google Drive. What Justin and Nico were working on, various video templates, the actual submission itself, which came later after the DARE had ended, but I got everything from the students ahead of time. We had like coding schemes for the streamers we were studying. Again, these are all public soda streams, so ethically we were okay with doing that. Weekly meeting notes, keeping an agenda and so forth for each other, and then offering like scholarship to review, things of that sort that just kind of came together, and past articles that have been written collaboratively. Oh, I did X out of that one. So student work, let's look it up. This is up. You know what? I've got to find that real quick. It doesn't look like it's coming up. Oh, there we go. That was closed. I wanted to mention this. So, what we ended up doing as a result of this was writing kind of about, a team coming together and collaborating on a project. What are the methods that are best? And we talked about like various challenges. Pandemic restrictions made it hard to collaborate in real time unless we were sitting on Zoom, but we're all so tired of being on Zoom. How to get familiar with platforms, right? Temporal limitations of Twitch. Like if we're sharing so many files to make videos and to do analysis, there can be a lot of hang up. Like if everybody on the team perhaps doesn't have access to high power equipment, or let alone Wi-Fi, it's easy to take that stuff for granted. And I think sometimes it revealed itself. We'd say, oh, wow, like this took 10 hours to download this massive, gig worth of material. Took forever to download. And so, we kind of worked through how we addressed those and what we did accordingly. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. The students did an amazing job. And again, I hope to get back to DARE later on in my career. Okay, so a few things to mention in response to that is some of the things that were coming together during this project, and I wish I consulted more, and I would encourage anyone to think about more, is the student guide to group work. Now, this is through Learning Commons, and several of my colleagues and faculty that I know across different departments worked on this project to help students and fellow writers, I would argue, work on group work. We know group work is difficult. If you've worked on a group project, has it always gone the way you imagined? How have you resolved those sort of issues if they've come up? What are some really interesting things that have come out as a result? It's hard to say. There's a lot we can think through. So what they have kind of here are a couple modules that even students have helped with as well from our department. Understand kind of what the team dynamic is and the goals. For example, we can sort of see here, they've got a number of kind of tools and resources you could think about. What kind of time commitments do they have, for example? How do they manage their time? What grade are they kind of hoping for? If you're working on something that isn't for a class, you can ask these same things to your fellow writers. Do you have the capacity to work maybe 50-50 on this piece? Or is it kind of a situation where one person takes the lead in writing, as I did with this piece I linked to, and the others lean into the idea of videos? Sometimes authors who may be listed later on the byline, for example, as we sort of see here, like Nandita Narayana-Murthy, she did a fantastic job writing a section of our lit review in this piece. And then from there, Beth and I did the majority of the writing elsewhere. But she was instrumental in helping us compose basically the main intervention in the article, and also giving us numerous bits of feedback. So once we established how that was going to go, it was really clear to, just to kind of hold each other accountable, because I would come back and I'd say, all right, I did the methods section, you did the general findings, Nandita did the lit review, and we kind of chunked it that way. I recently composed a piece that's coming out sometime this year, and I said, I'm okay to be like third author. I will do my section. I'll help out with the sort of editing and so forth, but please feel free to take the lead, take more of that credit. If you have the capacity to. Just for me, my capacity to complete it in a more involved way was not as strong. I had a lot going on at the time for my own project, i.e. my book. And so I just, I was honest about it. And I think that's the thing that they're getting at here is understand what the goals are of the goals and what they can contribute based on their strengths, interests, and growth-oriented goals. So there are other things they have listed here of how to communicate, how to hold each other accountable. There are lots of task tracking tools as well that they suggest here. Keeping meeting minutes, following up with each other. Negotiating. That's a big thing with collaboration. How you negotiate who's doing what and, also respect each other's time. Avoid shaming each other, right? There are lots of ways to get at this without having to be lead to some really, what we might say are bad disagreements. And there are a number of articles out there on how collaboration has gone wrong. I can link to that as well in the notes, but a colleague of mine, Molly Scanlon, wrote about this a little bit in a piece for composition studies, and it was mostly about collaboration with comics creators. And really what we see here is just where there are kind of fissures and cracks in collaboration when you have more and more people involved. Lots of room to kind of make mistakes, right? But also learn some valuable lessons from it. Okay. Let me talk also about just something real quick, and then we'll turn to our special guest here soon. Just to reference sort of how this article also looked on a more basic level. If you find yourself being kind of worrying about writing a paper, for example, together, biggest thing I recommend is try to assign tasks by subheadings. So this approach that we did is largely what's called like an MRAD article. And what we're doing is introduction, methods that you've taken to it, results, and discussion, right? Things of that sort. It can kind of change depending on who you ask, but generally it's a formula. Like it's very popular in scientific writing and social science research, qualitative research, things like, lots of different academic disciplines and research areas deploy that method. And so you can see how we do it here. We go intro, literature review, methods, results, and then final takeaways that we have here. And so what we did for this one is we went through and we said, all right, like I was just mentioning earlier, like I'll write the intro, you write the lit review, I'll write the methods. We just go back and forth. If you're working with 2 people, it's really easy to divide those tasks. If you have 3 people, you can divide that accordingly as well. And then put it all in a doc, begin composing, keep in touch with each other with those strategies that are recommended. Task lists, things like that. Personally, I think regular meetings with your team is really helpful for resolving questions and issues. And that's something we'll talk about more in a bit. All right. So I can see Dr. Stevie Bell here in the chat. We're going to bring her on in just a second. I want to say a couple words about her before we bring her on to the show. So let's turn to our special guest chat here now. Let me go ahead and I'll pull up the little banner, things like that. Okay, so we're going to turn to a conversation with Dr. Stevie Bell. Dr. Stevie Bell joined York's University's writing department in 2012 after graduating with a PhD in rhetoric and composition design from the University of Waterloo. She teaches academic and professional writing in our professional writing program and often serves as a one-on-one instructor in the Writing Center. She does this on Tuesdays, by the way, during this term. Please make an appointment with her. an amazing instructor for those one-on-one appointments. Her research interests include writing, program administration, civic engagement, education, academic integrity, with specific emphasis on understandings and treatments of student plagiarism, digital writing pedagogy, and the complicity of writing higher ed curricula in Western neocolonialism. Amazing stuff. She spends much of her energy advocating for enhanced writing support for students across disciplines. And I've seen that support in full action. I'm proud to say I've been a collaborator with Stevie, and I'm excited to talk to her about all of her projects that are going on that are highly collaborative. All right, let's bring you on.
Hello.
Hi. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. So glad we could talk, Stevie.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can hear the crazy loud fan running on my computer.
No, I can't. Oh, yeah, that's the one that manually you have to turn on and off, right?
Yeah, I do. And if I turn it off, my computer melts. So I'm glad you can't hear it.
Okay. No, we've got a little bit of music playing, so that'll drown things out. I think that's good. But yeah, how's your day going?
It's going really well. I've been doing a little bit of collaborative writing this morning, and and then meetings. Yeah.
Excellent. What are you working on today?
Brian and I, my writing partner Brian and I, are working on. We're actually collaborating with two individuals, one located in South Africa and one in Colombia, on a collaborative piece, and it's really expanding my collaborative writing skills doing this like kind of out of time, because everyone's in different time zones and different parts of the world. So we're working together on sort of a framework, a decolonial framework for writing center initiatives that cross borders. So when a North American writing center scholar might collaborate with someone outside of the global north who thinking about teaching writing or even teaching English writing in the context of a writing center type program. So it's a really cool project.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned time zones. Let's see, you are on Eastern, if I remember correctly, right? Yeah, you are, because we're both in this area. You've got someone who's like an hour or two ahead, and then I just don't know offhand, but what's the time zone in South Africa?
I don't know what the time zone is, but right now it's like 7 p.m. there-ish.
Yeah.
And so my afternoon is their evening. And then Colombia is interesting because they're sometimes in our same time zone, but sometimes not, because their time doesn't change the way ours does seasonally. So so it's always difficult to keep track of where everyone is in time, depending on what season it is, etc. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I've had to do interviews and meet with folks who are in like Singapore, Japan, things of that sort, and it's Friday night at 6 on my end. It's in the afternoon or very early in the morning, something like that. And yeah, just trying to even line up when to meet is one thing that could easily take a turn with the collaborating. Oh, well, when are we going to meet? How do we do that? And just before you came on, I was mentioning the idea of meeting just in real time together in some space seems really important for collaborative projects, or at least for me. I find enormous value in doing that, in addition to having like more asynchronous stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know if you have a strict plan for how we'll move forward here in our discussion, but I would emphasize that as well.
Yeah, I do. I sent you some questions, so we're good. Well, you mentioned Brian Hodson, and we see here like up on the screen. Sorry, that's Molly Scanlon's piece. Let me go back to yours. Let's go. Okay. All right. So you have collaborated. You've published several articles with Brian Hodson, and I can see that from your CV. I've talked to you a lot about this as well. What do you think just generally, we'll start with the big broad question, like what is the value of writing collaboratively?
Yeah, so I think the fundamental value is that this is cliche, but like two minds are greater than one. It's extraordinarily useful to be able to bounce ideas off of another person, to get feedback, to have them play devil's advocate with your arguments, and to really, to like move in and out of different roles. Like how Brian and I do this a lot, where we're like, how will this be perceived or read by this type of an audience, or by this person, or by people situated here in this realm? And we're only really able to think through those things in conversation. I think conversation and like that social nature of writing, bringing that into the writing process helps you to be more successful to use writing to communicate. And I know that lots of scholarship gets published and then doesn't get read ever, or like nothing happens with it. And so often, and same with student essays, right? We turn them in, they don't go anywhere beyond the grading point, right? I term them as dead on arrival, because they're not communicating anything. They're not trying to have real impact. And really situating conversation in the writing process can help both student writers, but also professional writers and academic writers and scholars to remember that the real goal is not to get a grade, or not to just get a line on your CV, but rather to do something in the world, whether it be like for your own learning, or to take an essay and move it into a portfolio that's online, or a news article, or to do something with it. And I don't think that you can. I think it's easier to be successful at that when talking and sharing with others is a fundamental component of the writing process, which is why I strongly believe in all different kinds of collaboration, whether it be a co-author relationship like I have with Brian on many pieces, or as a consulting relationship with an editor in the professional world, or a tutor, say, at the Writing Center. So there's that piece. But then there's also the social piece. I find it extraordinarily lonely to write on my own. I like to be able to share what's got my goat, to rant, and then get that off my chest and move into my professional way of like thinking about something when I'm writing. And I think that collaborative writing outside of grade school-based collaborative writing can provide the kind of relationship that brings you friendship through work, like a colleague who's in it with you, who's along for the ride, and it's so important as a professional scholar.
I love that. I find I get more motivated to write when I know that I have something due, or I'm showing up with somebody and composing. And so for me, it kind of becomes addictive as like a process, because I can sit there with Dr. Beth Caravella, for example, and we're getting together and working like once a week or every other week on a project, whether it's in VR or on Zoom, sometimes with the mic off and camera off. But it's something about like, I'm going to get something for you to read, or I'm just going to check in with you, and some ideas are unlocked. It's amazing as a result. So that's nice. Yeah, the social element seems to be really key for this. So I want to ask you just about your process of collaborating. So we talked about value, but I had picked an article just from your CV, and I thought we could kind of walk through, as I was sort of doing earlier with an article about, how you completed various tasks, like how you divided those up. Did it work that way? How did you communicate your progress? Things like that. If this article is okay, we can walk through that. Or if there's another one, feel free to let me know. We can.
They're all different, of course.
Yeah.
But so process. Okay. One of the things that I think it's important to foreground is that there are different types of collaboration. There's collaboration where you're writing with and alongside someone. There's coordination where you're dividing up tasks. That is collaboration as well. And these things can be blurred. So there's a muddy middle where you maybe first divide tasks up and take things on, and then you exchange. Like significantly edit, transform together. But what Brian and I mostly do is fundamentally collaborative, where we sit on Zoom together, usually at night after my kids have gone to bed and I've put in my full workday. We'll sit down together, each with a cup of tea or beverage of choice. We will open up a document. We will be in the same space. So shared, we use Google Docs and Google Drive for this because Microsoft doesn't allow us to work cross-institutionally, which is frustrating. But yeah, so we use Google Docs a lot, and we'll be in that shared space, both on Zoom and in the document together. Sometimes we are writing, especially if we're writing something difficult and we're trying to figure out like, what is the focus? What are we trying to get at? We might be writing sentences together, like jointly in the same paragraph at the same time, trying this, trying that. We'll hit enter a few times and say, hey, look at this, and like write in capital letters, like, hey, look at this, and like write something out, or just trying this, we're very playful and free with like the way that we don't write linearly, like the way that you would imagine, like, okay, I'll write sentence 1, you write sentence 2. It's like, you start drafting an intro. I'm going to try drafting an intro, but I like what you started with. So I'm going to copy and paste that and go my own direction. Then like, we'll see where we ended up with, like sometimes it's truly, we're writing the same thing alongside each other. Other times we're developing things up because we have pieces maybe pre-written or half-written thoughts that we're pulling in. So with this piece, essentially what it came from was a larger project that was going to be a book project, but the pandemic childcare situation really didn't support that. So but this came from a larger project that Brian and I were working on. So we've been talking and publishing on digital writing and digital writing support across Canada for a few years by the time we got here. And so a lot of it's very interesting because if you were to ask me, like, point to something you wrote and point to something Brian wrote, I'd have to say, like, I can point to things that Brian initiated, like conversation points Brian initiated, but everything is marked by a discussion that he and I had, or it's imbued with things that we know each other value, or like pieces that we bring to the table. We have very complementary backgrounds, so we see things similarly, but like from different perspectives, which is very productive. Okay, so but where did this come from? This came from Brian and I having a fun debate around a casual table at a conference with others, saying the traditional essay is dead because these other tools are morphing the way that we're thinking and writing, whether they are present in the essay at the end that students are studying the traditional essay or not. They're present in the way that students are thinking and working with ideas across platforms. And so that really generated like this play with this idea. And we started to ask questions about how many digital writing projects are being assigned in higher education and are they being supported in writing centers? And then what kind of support is needed? So we had been sort of asking those questions together. And Brian invited me to give a keynote address at a conference he was organizing in Halifax. And so actually a lot of the literature review, the complexity of deep multimodal writing development, is stuff that I wrote for that keynote. That then after the keynote, conversation with Brian raised all these other questions that kind of like came out of having developed this foundational understanding of how complex these things are. So we framed it with these questions. We started doing together, again, on Zoom, some research where we were going to writing center websites. We started looking at, and you can see us reporting this initial research in like the second and the third paragraph. Conversely, we have not found similar writing support for units or programs or units for the support of multimodal composing in Canada. In a survey of 22 writing center websites, literally, we were on Zoom. We had an Excel spreadsheet we were filling out together, and we were both kind of we're going across Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just filling in this Excel spreadsheet. Look at what I'm finding. Look at what you're finding together. So that was like data generation that was collaborative.
Wow, yeah.
And we started to formalize, okay, well, we actually want to survey people so we can go deeper beyond what their websites are saying.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up formulating the research questions. And this is where you can see in the method and data collection, we've formulated specific research questions. We went through York's REB because Brian's an independent scholar and doesn't have the same institutional access. So I led the REB process, which, if you've ever gone through it, can be extended.
Yes.
But Brian was there all the way because, I would create the survey, send it to Brian. He would do the survey, give me feedback. I would update the survey. So it was like a back and forth constantly. And then we collected the survey, distributed the survey, and then we shared the data between us in, again, in Google Doc, in Google Spreadsheets, Google Sheets.
Mm-hmm.
And we collaboratively analyzed it together. We duplicated it a bunch. So he had his own that he was working on. I had my own copy, but we were talking to each other and asking questions saying, hey, look at this. Are you seeing this? And that was a really useful process because we were able to really curtail the reading into of results by saying, am I reading, would you imagine that this is saying this? And he could come back and say, no, it could also be saying these other things. And I think that really enhanced collaboration when you're interpreting data collection and survey results can be very useful for limiting some cognitive bias, the potential to just read into and go off on like your own perspective, and you can start to see that, oh, there's multiple ways of interpreting this data. And then we wrote about the results sort of together, collaboratively.
Yeah.
That's why it's very difficult for us. You'll see our names are always swapped in our publications on my CV. Sometimes his name's first, sometimes my name's first. It really doesn't matter because every word, every thought, every question has arisen because of the conversation the two of us are having.
Amazing. Yeah. And I mean, so much to unpack of what you said. I mean, yeah, it's true. And sometimes you may not be touching that particular word or sentence, but there's some kind of layer with your fellow writer that's there. Like, even if it's just like, looks great, move on, like you've got that feedback from them. Especially on the data part, I wish a perfect world, or I don't want to say that we could look at like how those data sets look and how you've talked. And I wish I could do the same thing, just because that's something I did like about 2 summers ago, but ethics, we don't want to do that. Yeah. So, but I could just say, like, there was a value with working with 2 other writers and saying, all right, we have this data set. You go off with it for a week. I'll go off with it for a week. We all do. And then we come back and say, okay, how do we rate these sort of things? We were doing emotional coding for survey responses. And we just, okay, positive, negative, mixed. We sort of started with those basics. And then we would argue productively, I'd say, about like, well, no, I think that's more positive. I think that word meetings, however, suggests some negativity in the context, and something about stepping away a bit from each other, but coming back and then, infusing the words is very, very unique. And I want to ask too, do you, beyond like the data stuff, do you two ever just say, I'm going to work on this abstract myself or this paragraph myself, and I'll come back to you in an hour? You can't see what you're working on. And then you say like, wow, we're either way different or we kind of,
you're right. Often we're in the same document, but sort of taking the lead on different sections. That usually doesn't happen until we have momentum on a project and we have a shared understanding of what our project goals are. Like, we're very clear about we're working towards this, and we will talk about it before we kind of break off, right? So we'll say, okay, I'm going to work on this section. I'm going to cover these things, and my goal is to construct this gap or address these issues that we need to foreground before we get here. And then he'll say, okay, well, I'm going to go and start writing about them here, but we're on Zoom while we're in the different sections. So even though that's coordinated writing, we are still able to just say, hey, what vocabulary are you using when you're referring to X? So that we can, and then we often will stop and say, well, what is the best vocabulary to use? We'll have that discussion, we'll define it, and then we can move forward in our individual sections. And then we read what we've written together with each other, sometimes out loud, sometimes like you can just see like what the other person is highlighting and where their cursor is. And it's really interesting to watch someone read your writing, knowing exactly what word they're reading right now, if they're pausing on it or not. Because we're on Zoom.
It's me sweaty. Yeah, I go.
But it's not like, I think, and this is something I haven't talked about, but I haven't been able to replicate this kind of writing relationship with others. Not that I've tried that hard, but I think you need a strong relationship with the person you're writing with. You need to understand their values, their goals, their personality, the way in which they're giving feedback. Like Brian and I are like, no word is precious. Nothing is precious. In fact, if it's precious, we'll highlight it and put a comment and go, bam, and then the other person will say, I really like what you're saying, but I actually don't think it's that clear. Can we clarify it or whatever, right? We can yell at each other, and it's all in good fun, and it strengthens the relationship. So actually spending time with each other outside of the writing is part of collaborative writing. It's part of the skill building. Like our relationship, we don't just spend time with each other writing. We spend time with each other on Zoom, where I'm working on emails or prepping for a course, and he's doing research with another writing partner. He has a few, and we're still talking about our writing. We're talking about our concerns and stuff, but that's like all relationship building. And it's like on the basis of that strong relationship that this is possible. And I think that, it sort of foregrounds some of the issues with the classroom context in collaborative writing. Why that doesn't work.
Do you I know I had posed a question to you about that. Maybe we could just pivot to that if that's okay. Then come back to some of your comments with about your articles with Brian. I want to ask you more about that too, but maybe that might be a good just natural segue. We get but I mean, like to that point of relationship building for classes, I can say just anecdotally, I can say like when I'm starting with these discussion groups or doing any kind of like thing we're going to make, even a thing you make in 5 minutes. People, students are getting to know each other, and there's not a lot of time to do that relationship building unless they know each other. But oftentimes, like they might from a previous class, but when you're like, we're going to make something right now together, a lot has to be rapidly done. But I kind of wonder for you, I asked you about kind of that ongoing narrative that we often hear, and I've heard from even my, wife and many friends, like I hated doing collaborative projects. And there have been many that have gone wrong. So like, I was wondering, what advice do you have, or maybe insights or thoughts do you have for, addressing maybe that, maybe that air of negativity, right? Of that.
So I have to be upfront. I hated them too as a student. I hated them. And a lot of it was around my need to control the process and to control the outcome. And a lot of these feelings of unfairness, like these questions about why professors matter, about academic integrity, until it comes to group work, when some students are writing the coattails of others. And then professors don't seem to think that that's a problem of academic integrity. And I really, I felt very frustrated with group work, and I've given a lot of thought about how to assign and teach and support collaborative writing specifically in classroom spaces. And I think it actually comes down to identifying recognizing that collaboration is a highly skilled activity on its own right. It has its own unique skill set, and it has a process that is different from independent writing. And students don't necessarily come into group projects with those skills, and yet they're often assigned group work because, like, oh, they're going to have to work in groups in the real world or in business settings or whatever, and so they have to have some experience, and yet they're given the experience, like the opportunity to experience something, but they're not actually taught the skills or strategies that are fundamental to a successful experience. The experience itself isn't structured in such a way to teach the process, right? And so, unfortunately, group work is often expected but not taught. And that's I think that's where a lot of the student frustration comes from, as well as those feelings of unfairness that some students don't earn the final grade in their group members' opinion, right? And so I think instructors need to start by asking themselves, first of all, what is their goal with assigning group writing or group work? What skills do they want students to learn? What strategies do they want them to refine or try out or try on? And how does the project necessitate group work, right? A 5-page reflection does not seem to jive well with a group project, right? And so thinking like, okay, well, if this multi-modal assignment, for instance, those tend to be great for group work because people come in with different skill sets that can help each other out. But then you still need to go beyond just skills sharing to, well, why does the final piece need to be a group, like a collaborative product? So my advice to teachers is to actually have them go through an exercise where they're identifying learning outcomes that are like, what are the skills and strategies you want students to learn? And then are you grading for them? Because sometimes the assessment is based on the quality of the final piece. Should it be? Perhaps it should be based on the skills and the strategies that students tried on and were thinking about and reflecting on throughout the process, right? Those are part of your learning outcomes. You should be assessing for those and not for like the final thing, or that's the final thing to be in a different category of assessment. So really it's like asking instructors to be more cognizant of what it is they're assigning and why, and teaching to it. And, but I think that in the upper years, in smaller classes, sometimes the relationships are there to just say, hey, let's jump into things, especially if it's low stakes, because those grades really matter in the upper years as well. So students are always thinking about that. And so ways of making collaborative assignments scaffolded, more low stakes, actually identifying for students the way you want them to collaborate. Do you want them to write alongside each other, synchronously, collaboratively, the way that I've described Brian and I writing? Do you want them to write, to coordinate a writing project with each other, where they're distributing tasks and then coming together at the end to kind of make it flow or find a common voice or some coherence, right? Identifying that there are different things, that they're not necessarily better, but one's not necessarily better than the other, but they can be better suited to specific tasks and projects, right? And this all comes down to, how are you teaching collaboration? Are you at all? And how are you managing people like me in the class who are so obsessively perfectionistic that, like, I need some actual social support in this situation to let go of different things that I value in my work, my outputs, so that I can be open to learning these different skills and strategies, right? And like dance that I need to engage in. Instructors need to be more mindful. I think students do a good job, actually, of going with the flow when they're thrown into these situations. I don't think students have much to learn. I think instructors have a lot to learn. for the collaboration. And students are just put in difficult positions because of that.
Yeah, if there isn't some kind of infrastructure or a bit of scaffolding in it, it could be difficult. And I think like what's interesting to me is for even if you're in the workplace, you have, let's say like, you might be working with like a design firm or a creative agency. You might be the copywriter, but you're working with the designer. So the roles are already established.
Yeah.
But for these students, they have to oftentimes, and I'm guilty of doing this too. Like I've just said, okay, yeah, let's pair up for short, low stakes stuff without saying, okay, you're going to do the video. They have to decide that stuff themselves, and to do that quickly, let alone in 12 weeks, can be really challenging. So lately I've kind of moved in a direction of just allowing people to collaborate if they want to, and just saying, okay, here are the stakes. You get the same, mark, but it's more self-driven, as in, just like with you and Brian, you weren't forced to come together and write. You decided to because of your relationship. And so some students may, after a few weeks, I've decided I like working with you. Let's write this paper together. That's fine with me. I think that's really interesting. And now the accountability stuff hasn't come up, but I think it's because of that relationship. They can have these really honest conversations about, hey, this week I'm struggling. Can you pick up for me? Things like that. And it tends to work out. But I do admit, like I definitely should do a better job of sort of specifying that stuff. And that's why I'm fascinated by this group work toolkit that they have on this stuff, because just so many resources for negotiating and conflict and things like that.
Yeah, I believe Marlene Bernholtz and Dunya were fundamental in fundamental in creating these sets of resources that are meant to go across disciplines.
Absolutely. Okay, so on that note, kind of back to your projects, we talked a bit about how you all compose on the same page, and kind of, you say no words are precious. So you're really it seems like in real time and very in a concentrated way, working on your collaborative voice. And it's gotten, my assumption is it's gotten more natural as you've been doing the work together more and more, sort of each other's moves. So in addition to that, I wanted to ask, like, Google Docs is a space to doing that. Do you have other tools you recommend for completing collaborative projects that have been really helpful for you?
Google Docs has been a constant. Sometimes we've tried other things, but we always return to Google Docs. It's just, and we create shared folders. So we're not sharing individual files with one another. We're saving everything related to a specific project in a shared folder, so that Brian has access to even the notes that I've taken on stuff that I've read that I'm pulling from, so that if he doesn't understand something that I've read and have a source that I'm bringing into conversation in a piece, he can go and read my notes and then decide if he needs to go and skim that article. It can kind of create efficiency in terms of catching up on one another's expertise. We also use Mendeley. If Brian's watching, he'll laugh because I never remember how to sign in.
That's something like Monday, things like that. Or no, this is more of a citation, right? Yeah. Okay.
It's like a citation. It saves a PDF of the sources, and it allows you to organize them into groups and make shared groups. The one big downfall for collaborative writing that we found with Mendeley is it doesn't allow you to share the notes you take on a source.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So if I read something and take notes, I can take the notes in a shared group in Mendeley with Brian. He can see that I've added the source. He can see and access the PDF that I've uploaded there, but he can't see my personal notes about the source. And because we rely on each other to do an in-depth read of something, to take notes before we just skim the article for ourselves, like, this is part of the efficiency of working collaboratively, as we can kind of develop some of the research. We can't rely on Mendeley for doing that. And that's why for me it's kind of fallen off my radar, because that's fundamental to what we're doing. So Brian still maintains our Mendeley group, and he formats and does all of our reference lists, and I am in debt to him for that work. Because I'm so terrible at it. But this is sort of why I've fallen off of Mendeley. Because it thinks about collaborative sharing of the resource, but not collaborative sharing of the thoughts, the reactions to, the reflections on the resource that the individual scholars have. And that's it's fundamental. Often Brian will say, oh, this reading is necessary. We need to hang our hat on it. And I'll say, actually, I think it's problematic. And we have those discussions and debates, sometimes asynchronously alongside the notes that we've put in Google Docs about a source. And that's all part of collaborative writing, right? Research and reading is part of collaboration, or part of writing, and then the collaboration extends to that. Honestly, Google Docs is so phenomenal. And sometimes, if we're having trouble conceptualizing a piece, we'll throw open a Google Jamboard and we'll get sticky notes and move them around together. And it just has all the tools we need. Even though it seems like, it's old, it's been around.
Yeah, overplayed, something like that.
It's just so convenient.
There is an image I totally forgot to pull up that I really, while we're talking, I'll try to find if I can, but it shows the wave of collaboration, how everything's so yes, awesome, and then it just hits a point, where your momentum slows down and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I think sometimes for me, it's easy to get depressed when we're in that research and reading space, right? I'm I just want to write. I want to get words down, get this thing done. But I have to always remind myself that's actually part of writing, and collaboration is just.
You need to find a collaborator, Rich, who feels the opposite way.
Yeah.
Because this is Brian and I.
Yeah.
I hate that research part because I feel like I'm wasting my time. I'm dragging my feet.
Yeah.
Brian's always no, slow down. And you can start to write, but I'm going to keep reading, or I'm going to keep dragging you back into the research, because he's read this.
Yeah.
So I think, and as you've intimated, that not just finding someone who comes at the same questions from different backgrounds or different perspectives who can broaden your thinking, but someone whose skill sets are complementary can be really valuable. And I find that collaboration is the most useful when you hit walls in writing.
Totally.
And you can anticipate when you're going to hit them. In the research stage, when your brilliant idea becomes too complex to reformulate into words, maybe when you're deep in the weeds of an article and the thread, you hit a wall, you might walk away from a piece and not come back. If you have a collaborator where you can actually just have a conversation with them and say, what are we writing? Where is this going? Why are we hitting our heads against the wall? And often there's a lightness to that kind of conversation that allows you to stay with it and work through it.
It's hard to have those conversations too, to say, I don't think this is working right now. I don't know if you've had to have you had to have those difficult conversations and just kind of go, you know what, we need to just take a step back, take a breath. And
absolutely. Brian's been trying to write on socio-digital justice for years. And I don't feel comfortable in the theoretical framing that he's bringing to it, mostly from his graduate degrees. And so I find my ability to help limited. And, we've had this piece that's gone through different evolutions. We've submitted it to different places and gotten different kinds of feedback. And we're just kind of taking it down the road, thinking about how it can come into play in different projects that we're doing. And multiple times I've had to say, I don't know how to help move this piece forward. Let's maybe bring someone else in who feels more strong, like who feels more comfortable, like let's expand the collaboration. Has been my proposal. Of course, there's time constraints, and we always have 3 things in the pot. Go at once. So this tends to get kicked to the side. But yeah, no, and there have been other things too where we're in the middle of writing something and we need to have a real conversation about one of us really not feeling like, the strength is there or the center is at the heart of the piece. Those are tough conversations, and that's really when the other person needs, like when this no words are precious really comes in. And usually what we do is we never delete, we always just duplicate and make a new copy. We rename it experimental, moving forward draft, whatever. And the other person says, okay, go, so that I can try to visualize the revision or the direction you're imagining. We'll rewrite like the intro or something, come back, think about it. The other person might do something like where they duplicate it and try on their own. It's really about, this is the process, right? Process. And being able to come together and say, hey, I'm not feeling comfortable with this. And having the other person say, okay, why, like where, how, and just like the willingness to engage in that conversation. Brian and I are always willing. So. And
did that come naturally?
With Brian, I mean, when we met each other, we immediately engaged in like an argument, like a heated argument. That was fun with each other. And we just sort of get along in that way. We know that the other person is not going to get offended. I'm just seeing that Dia saying that she has a document called The Graveyard. Yeah, we do too. We always have a Cut Darlings document.
Great. Okay.
Multiple documents. Yeah. Where all writing is valuable. So we're never deleting, which helps us let go of things and move forward and imagine different possibilities. But that relationship came really easily, but I think it's a personality thing too. It's, I am so open to being redirected. I actually find it fun. And I think maybe this is why I'm well suited to collaboration, that I find it intellectually stimulating to have someone say, let's think about it this way. This like from this different perspective. I'm more than interested in those thought experiments while writing. I value them. I didn't when I was a student writer. I didn't feel like I had the EE. I felt like I couldn't take the risk. The stakes were too high.
And I'm thinking about stakes now as and as I was looking for this as well, because I just like really wanted to put this out there that this is like the lore thing. So I've got you on the screen. I've got this. And I was like, I have to find this because this is what Dr. Easter shared with me once. It starts on this high, right? And then we move into like the space of meeting and saying, I'm still thinking, I'm not sure this is where we want to go, and that kind of mulling, right? It could feel like a real bad time, but and it's also reductive. It's kind of reductive to be like, oh, it's just part of the process. We have to be sad, right? But like, but yeah, I mean, if we just even take out that long dark period, there's just like general like research and chatting and ideating, right? And then we might even sync more when we kind of work on this and go, I don't even know. I am so in the weeds. I don't know what to do. But interestingly, like temporally, once you take that break and you've gone through some of that thinking, you've done the research, you found the thing that unlocks like the organization of the article or something, you finish it. And then you're like, let's not do that again, or let's do it again, right? Or what did I learn from it? And like, I've been trying to chart this stuff myself and say, what can I do next time? Or if I one thing I could do next time is just be aware that this will happen. Sometimes we'll have like a space of no writing at all and just sit and chat and build our relationship for collaborators. It's very tricky sometimes.
I think that's like, so I have to say that I don't think Brian and I ever get to these like huge sort of negative spaces, because I can't say that we have, and it's because we don't, because we're friends. Like, we spend time with each other writing, and we spend time with each other when we're not writing. He's in Halifax, I'm in Toronto, so always kind of on Zoom. Sometimes we're doing different things. We're checking in, like I'm planning a class and I'm saying, hey, I need materials about X, and he'll spend 10 minutes helping me find materials or talk about the issue to formulate my thoughts about class. And then he's working on something else, and it's a very give and take, right? And so it doesn't feel like we're scheduling meetings. It's just, hey, well, I see you tonight after the kids go to bed. Yes. Or and so it doesn't, I think that maybe the scheduling of the meeting can be, you know, who has time when, and then it feels like you have to prepare for a meeting, and then you have to deliver. And that brings a layer of formality that can really make it feel like a bureaucracy.
And if we,
yeah, I was going to say that I'm feeling a little bit of that with this new collaboration with 4 people in different time zones, that it's like that is creeping in, and like, where is everyone at is a little bit more muddy. So I think, that relationship with the people, like, you're writing with them because you have shared interests and shared, like shared values. Making sure that you have hangout time that's not writing can actually move your project along.
I'm thinking about the bands I played in and how we would just meet for like an hour before we started doing anything related to it. And we would just sit and have a beverage and sort of say, okay, like, what's going on today? And then spend time afterwards. And it's almost like it's hard to formalize, right, as like a part of it, but it's very important. And I kind of wonder for students who are checking in, like, maybe a way of doing it is sort of along the lines of what you all do now, is just have a regular time that you can all meet, but keep it low stakes. There might be an agenda, but it's just like, I'm going to sit and write with you all. So I know our student association has like sort of voice chat hangouts and things like that on Discord in different ways. Something about just being kind of present in an ambient way can be, it seems to reveal some of the stuff that you would even address already in a collaborative project. And it's a habit too you've both developed. So it's, doesn't feel, to me, the way you describe it, it doesn't seem forced or anything like that or formalized. It's just, we're here, let's work.
We're here.
Cool. Yeah.
Also, like, we work independently too, and we have a shared workspace on Slack, and we have all of our projects kind of different channels. But one of we have a general friendship channel. So we share life updates, pictures. I send pictures of my kids. He sends pictures of the beach and his cat, sometimes his grown now kids. So we're checking in friendship wise, but we're also always checking in when we read something. Like, if I read something, an article or a new book that's come out, even a news headline, we share that in a research notes channel in Slack. And so we're kind of always like, and then I'll read, like this clip that he's put in, he's linked to the article, and I'm like, what's that saying? And it pulls you back into the conversation in a very natural way, right? So it maintains a momentum that otherwise I might, like, I've got so much on my plate, otherwise I may never think about our project ever.
Exactly.
And never get anything done. So I think, at the outset, when you're getting involved in a writing project with someone, and maybe this is more pertinent to scholars than students, but sharing what's on your plate, how how you like to work, like sort of setting out the collaborative process that you're interested in following at the outset.
Mm-hmm.
And saying, this is my priority. This project or this writing thing is what I'm going to be working on outside of my other responsibilities for the next 3 months, and that's it. So that they know your head's going to be in this, and making sure everyone's kind of on the same page. Otherwise, people will fall off, and then resentment creeps in.
Exactly. And, I could speak firsthand, having maybe even as a student and as working early on in collaborative projects, is there's a lot of space for that stuff to creep in, that, it's hard to bring up until you get into it, have the experience with coming against that sort of thing. So for scholars, I think, and maybe even professional writers outside of academia, deciding things like how each institution values like authorship, and I was just stunned for a second when a journal asked me, okay, who's first author on this thing? And I was like, for my institution, like, it was a bit different. They said, you have some certain stakes you need to meet, but like, our department really values collaborative writing and can see all the labor behind it. Whereas someone else's institution may say, no, if you're not first author, we don't care. Like if you're second, it's point value sort of stuff, and we don't have that. And I'm thankful for it, because I think the politics of that stuff like doesn't come up as much, right? But feeling out like what's at stake for other folks, I think was something I had to learn, the hard way, right? And say, okay, sorry, I didn't ask you before. Now I have this awkward conversation, like, can I be author? Do you want to be, and how to support it, regardless, how to support each other if the time comes up, like about who did what, and then just time zones, as you mentioned, other life forces. Your points are a good reminder. We have to try to really just bring those out, as uncomfortable as they might be sometimes in the early stages of the project. Yeah.
I mean, I think absolutely being clear at the outset, and then thinking about the student context. What conversations do students need to have with their collaborator, their group members ahead of a project, and helping instructors scaffold those for students is really important. But I would have liked, and I think I always did in group projects, I always said, look, grades are really, really, really important to me. I don't know why. They're really important to me. So at the end of the day, if I'm not comfortable with, or I don't trust that this is going to be where I need it to be, I'm going to redo it. It would just be as transparent as possible. Have that conversation with my peers. Figure out, often it would be we'd be able to identify personalities, people who are more laid back, people who are like me, super grade focused, we'll say. And then we would divide up our roles based on those personality types, and clarify authority over editorial changes and this kind of thing at the outset. And that can do so much to prevent surprises down the line. But once again, I don't think that it should be left up to students to know how to do all of that. It should be instructors. And
to know when to intervene and when to step back. It's challenging, and I think we could spend an entire podcast a series on collaborative writing to maybe enhance what our colleagues have been doing in Learning Commons, just about these various vectors and things like that, because they're so unique via project, and who's on it, it's very fascinating. Well, we're almost out of time, and I've already taken up more time than I asked you for. So, Stevie, I really appreciate. No, it's a fascinating conversation. I wanted to keep asking you more and all that. So I really appreciate your time coming on. One thing I want to mention, and feel free to sort of say a bit about this genesis, and then we can sort of wrap up, is you're also doing a crowdsourced project on generative AI writing and Canadian writing experts. So I think I posted my little sort of practice with working with ChatGPT here on the stream. But what a sort of like interesting resource and a good mark of collaboration that's lower stakes. Like people can contribute in different ways. They've got acknowledgments and so forth. But do you want to tell us a bit about just quickly about sort of where this came from and what the aims are and things like that? Maybe how people can contribute if they're interested.
Yeah, so essentially ChatGPT has come out and changed the landscape of writing and instructors' reactions to like the way that they trust students as student writers as well. And what's happening is that there's a lot of expertise that is housed in writing studies that is very difficult to mobilize, because writing studies scholars in Canada are usually situated in roles across higher education that do not have research time granted to them. And so they're heavy service and teaching roles.
Mm-hmm.
And that can make it very difficult for the field of scholars to respond in timely ways to things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, crowdsourcing among us. So whenever you have time, drop in. So essentially what a colleague, Sarah Humphreys, who's at U Victoria on the other side of the country, her and I were chatting about the need to respond. Neither her nor I have a great deal of time to do so. And so the idea was, let's just create a document dump space.
Mm-hmm.
Let's create some headings so that we can organize sort of the conversation, if you will, and a long alphabetized list of references and resources, and see if we can't gather the expertise that's housed across Canada in these very dispersed spaces. Mm-hmm. And then the resource can be drawn on. It's like an open access. You can just cite that you pulled from it if you'd like. But anyone can kind of create policy statements or even just point people to the document as they are responding to their administration even and their response to tools like generative AI tools, tools that write for or with, I would say is the better term, student writers.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's super exciting. One of many things you're doing. That's awesome and very collaborative. So happy to talk with you about these projects. And we didn't get to talk much about your role as head of McLaughlin College, but you're doing some amazing collaborative things there as well. So if you're on York's campus, stay tuned for that. But other than that, I'm going to end the call as well on the stream. Just want to remind everybody what we've got coming up. We've got some great chats coming up on writing and traveling, revising, virtual reality, lit reviews presenting, along with guest speakers coming on each one of them. So I can't wait to do this work. And again, super grateful for having you, Stevie. And until then, we'll be back next Wednesday.
Thanks, Rich.
Great. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thanks again. Bye.